Well, good morning to everybody. And a reminder, if you join us next week, it'll be good afternoon, because next week we're going to do a run of these at midday just to see what it feels like. Morning, Jeremy. Morning, George.
Good morning, Pat. Good morning, George.
Morning.
I was laughing, Jeremy. I know that you're sort of the guest profile on this software that we use. George, you're also a co-producer on this, so you've probably already seen it. But I was laughing, Jeremy, because we get to see the messages that popped up beforehand, and this just popped up as we were starting from Richard. Peters 1, Mallard 0. And it made me laugh. Thank you, Richard. It made me laugh a lot. And yes, obviously, after our conversations yesterday, we will be talking about that. And if you heard us talking about it yesterday, actually, I told some stories about Winston Peters coming on podcast. The podcast that he came on that I was talking about was with Jeremy. So we'll get into that shortly and talk a bit about the experiences we've had and what's happened since then. But before we start, how's everybody? How you going, Jeremy? Haven't seen you for a couple of weeks. Things well?
Yeah, things are good. Things are things are slowly starting to get busier. I always say, the kind of work I do, especially after a lockdown, restarting it is like getting an oil tanker back up to sea. It doesn't, you can't just flick an engine and it goes. But yeah, I sort of last week was busy, which is nice, because it has not been for 3 years. Yeah. So apart from that, things are rolling along. It's good.
Well, you had, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were working sort of as a creative, a head writer, whatever the correct title was, for the project. And didn't you kind of quit from that to chase some other things like a week before we went into lockdown in 2020?
Yeah, 10 days. So basically, I stepped down from that role. I had a 6-week kind of dream bucket list holiday booked around the US and the Caribbean, which I was meant to leave for on the 5th of March, something like that. And we went into lockdown on the 20th. So yeah, that all perfect timing. It was brilliant. Yeah.
Because the other thing is, I guess one of the places that's seen sort of steady income and maybe even growth in some areas in these last 2 years has been some media outlets, because of course they've had to continue on and they've had to keep going. And so, producers for radio stations and cameramen and TV studios, they haven't lost work, because it's one of the few things that is an essential thing that has to keep on going. So
yeah, and I think one of the other things that's happened, I mean, just from what I've heard, and if it had happened earlier, I probably would still be in that role, because media companies notoriously have been one of the really last holdouts to moving away from the traditional model of, if you're not in the office, you're not working. Right. So even if you're in the office at a media company and you've got nothing to do for 6 hours, they still want you there. They want you on the ground. It goes back to the old days of, if a tip comes in, you need a reporter you can send out on the street. Whereas what COVID taught people was that you can work from home, you can work from remotely. I'll be fascinated to, come back and talk about this in 2 years' time to see how much of that stuck around, because I think it was a fundamental shift in a way a lot of people worked, and a shift for the better, not for the best reasons. But I think loosening up that real 9-to-5 Presbyterian work ethic that we've had in this country forever is actually, in the long run, is only a good thing.
It's hard as well, though, isn't it? I'm just thinking, as you're talking about media companies doing the 9-to-5, the worst fucking company I ever worked for was a media company who tried to, and I was a radio announcer doing a 4-hour radio show a day, right? On air, 4 hours. They tried to enforce a 40-hour work week on me. And I'm like, so in other words, we would be sitting in the offices, throwing the ball around like tennis balls from table to table, because we were there. And eventually I just said to my boss, this is ridiculous. As you guys both know, and if people don't, I mean, George, you know this because you can see the document that we share, like changing at 11:30 at night or midnight at night, because I'm doing prep for today's show. When you work in this kind of world, you never turn off. You're always working. And whether you're sitting in an office or whether you get an idea at 5:30 p.m. just before you're about to serve dinner to your kids and then go to your office, it's an area that if there are some media outlets still holding on to the idea of being in the office 40-hour week, they don't, those bosses, those boards, those people making those rules don't understand how media works. I never fucking turn off. In fact, it's one of my hardest things to actually stop. When I say working, my work is, what are we going to talk about today? What's happening in the news? What's going on? Oh, how can I spin that? You know, that never stops.
Yeah.
And so that could mean I work an 18-hour day, you know, well, 16-hour day if I wanted to be really flippant about it.
Yeah, it always fascinates me when, you know, very, very often if I'm booked to do a corporate event, you know, an awards night or something like that, the client will insist on having a meeting with me, a face-to-face meeting over a coffee somewhere, which is a pain in the ass for me, you know, because I do work from home. It means me getting up, and going out, and driving and parking, et cetera, et cetera. But it dawned on me years ago that that's not about me at all. That's about that person having an excuse to get out of their office for an hour.
Yes.
You know, the meeting might take 5 minutes, but it gives that person a reason, a work reason to go and have a coffee. And I cannot begrudge them that. Yeah, we're huge fans of the work harder, not work smarter model in this country. And I think, you know, like I say, come back to me. Let's do another interview in 2 years' time, and let's see how much of that has stuck around. Yeah, because I think it's proof for people it's doable.
I was laughing because the kind of the travesties or the hardships in your life you talked about when you listed off having to go out. One of the things was I have to get up. I'm like, okay, so
I didn't mean get out of bed. I mean get up from this chair I'm sitting in. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I do. I do realize what it sounds like.
George, you all right, mate? Everything going well?
Yeah, I guess the working from home thing is all right if we're not expected to go from working 8 days, 40 hours a week to all the hours of the week, right? I think if it's a way of disrupting that traditional model for the better, then it's all good. But, you know, there's a few things like it makes it harder to organize with your colleagues, for example, and things like that that I worry about, or having us constantly plugged into the mainframe.
I totally agree with you there. I think I can't remember where it is. Is it France, where they passed a labor law a few years ago, basically making it illegal to send somebody a work email outside of their defined office hours?
Wow.
I think it was France. Basically, yeah. And if you work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, it's actually against the law for your boss to email you at 6 o'clock on a Saturday. You know?
That's awesome.
Which, you know, that kind of thing. That's great.
It's crazy French. The crazy French people, those nutty French people. Yeah, and also I think the working from home thing is probably more relevant as well, depending on where you live. I know when I left Auckland near a decade ago, it was, you know, I lived out in Huia, for people who know the area, and without traffic, it was 45 minute drive to get to the studios in town. Here in Dunedin, even in rush hour, it goes from a 5-minute drive across town to a 12-minute drive across town. You know, so the idea of working in a city where you can spend an extra 2 hours with your kids or at home or, you know, whatever, I can see that as even more valuable. I hope. I mean, I said at the start of the pandemic, one of the things that was interesting is we've always talked about being able to work from home, but we've never done it. And that kind of forced that to happen. And I was always curious as to see what happened at the end of the pandemic, should that ever end. Don't watch South Park when they talk about it going on for 40 years. But it get to the end of it, will it stay that way? Because I guess there's two kinds of people, aren't there? They're the kinds that function well and are able to do it and love it from home. And I remember Leighton Smith, when he built his home out in South Auckland, wherever it was, he wired it all up to be able to be broadcast out of, and he never used it because he liked coming in, having the people there, having face-to-face contact, and so that's how he operated. I imagine now that he's not full-time on air and he's doing his podcast, that he probably is using it, that system that's all wired through his house. But when he had it done, he didn't want to work from home. He wanted to be around the people and around the producer and around the workers and actually touch people.
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, the social side of things huge. Obviously, I can't do my job from home a lot of the time. It physically requires on people being in the room, because I am not one of these people who thrives on a Zoom comedy environment. That is not
Yeah.
my bag. That's another thought I always had. The people who invented Zoom, they must have come up with that basically as an alternative to Facebook Messenger. What are they doing now? Looking at the world, going, "What are we, like, the essential service of business?"
Yeah.
But yeah, good on them. Anyway,
All
we
right.
digress. Yeah,
We could just hang out and this is our coffee. Like, we've started the show with a coffee because we don't want to get
exactly.
to
Yeah.
want to get to the news, but maybe we should. Because, Jeremy, let's start with one that George and I talked a bit about yesterday, which was, of course, Winston Peters. And I told some stories about Winston. I said that he was fun to talk to as a broadcaster, but he is a curmudgeon and he's difficult. And that's one of the reasons he's fun to talk to. And I told a few stories about how he seems to be someone who threatens a lot, but never actually does. And you and I were involved in a podcast around a couple of election cycles called The Slightly Correct Political Show, where Winston came on our podcast. And I think the answer was, I think what happened from memory was David Farrer's company had put out some polling that Winston thought was wrong, misleading, deceptive, or whatever. That's and right. On the podcast, he threatened legal action against David Farrer, and then never did anything. And I was highlighting that that's an MO of Mr. Peters often, that he makes lots of noise about doing something then doesn't, and was wondering if he'd take legal action about this. Proves he hasn't needed to because things are reversed. But first, you're welcome to jump in right now because I've talked a bit about your and I's interaction with Winston. But do you want to share any thoughts about the whole thing first?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. My interactions with him, with you, and then running into him a little bit socially. He's a guy who he professionally has his backup. He comes in with his defenses. I remember him coming into our podcast, whether it was the first or second time we had him on. I don't think it was the same time that you're talking about with the legal action, but you just knew that he came in ready to be attacked. And ready to go on the counterattack. And then actually we actually had nothing to attack him about. We just wanted to have a chat to him. Yeah. And he physically, visibly relaxed. So yeah, he is a guy who goes, this whole thing, I mean, the trespass notice I did think was a stretch. The fact that it's been withdrawn, it's a bad look for the speaker. The fact that Winston Peters has come out today saying, calling for a vote of no confidence. I'm not sure if he realizes he's not actually in Parliament, so can't actually make that happen. But the one thing you have to admire about Winston is, he's the absolute master of getting himself in a headline. It's, he did it during the protests, which is why this trespass notice was issued initially. He was absolutely right in the fact that he was only there because the protesters had asked to speak to him and other members of Parliament, and he turned up despite not being a member of Parliament. He's an absolute master at managing to make the news cycle rotate around him. And it's the secret to his longevity in Parliament, in the public eye. Yeah. I mean, he's a guy who gets more headlines when he's not a member of Parliament than 90% of the members of Parliament who are.
I think that that's the beauty of Winston Peters, and I've said this for a long time. And look, this is going to maybe sound a bit disrespectful. It's actually not meant to. He is probably the best opposition MP that we've seen in this generation of MPs.
I completely agree.
Because when he's been in power, he's basically achieved nothing. And people will go, "Oh, the gold card." It's like, yeah, okay. It was like, I've got this app in my phone called Store Card, and it's all your loyalty cards in one thing. And they just go to New World and just scan your phone now. He basically did that because he just amalgamated all the other benefits into one card. Other than that, and there was the wine box, right? And in the 80s, the wine box was huge, right? But other than those two things, well, I mean, the wine box wasn't necessarily achieving something in government, but he's a brilliant opposition MP because he's, as you say, controversial, and he comes in with his backup, and he always tries to find an angle of counterpoint against someone, even if it's a good point. And yeah, I laughed when I saw him calling for a vote of no confidence against the speaker, as you said, and I just thought it's kind of like a former All Black. going,
Yeah.
oh, they should fire this coach, get rid of this coach, he's useless. We should call for a vote of firing the All Blacks coach because he's no. I just thought, yeah, but then again, exactly what you said is sort of what we said yesterday, which is without Trevor Mallard's balls up, and this is a balls up by Trevor Mallard.
It is.
We would not be talking about Winston Peters today. He
Yeah.
would not be milking it for everything it's worth, and he wouldn't be back in the headlines. Shall we have a look at the actual? This is the story from last night on the retraction. We'll see what this has got to say for people who haven't caught up with it entirely, and then we'll come back to it.
He's the referee in the debating chamber, the landlord of Parliament, and the third most powerful person in politics after the Governor-General and Prime Minister. But it hasn't been a great day in the office.
It's an unholy mess, really.
It's absolutely shambolic. Absolute schmozzle.
This afternoon, Trevor Mallard withdrew 5 trespass notices for people who were at the anti-mandate protest, including the former Deputy Prime Minister and a former MP.
It's total shambles, and it shouldn't take a threat of legal action to bring the Speaker to his senses.
The only reason it's been withdrawn is because of the public backlash. It's been significant.
We said yesterday, Jeremy, there's a problem that there are a group of people who like to shout, "Get off my lawn." Winston Peters is one of those people, but what Trevor Mallard has done is he's gone and stood on Winston Peters' front lawn, and Winston said, "Get off my lawn." And in this instance, in this occasion, Winston was right to say, "Get off my lawn," because there was someone standing on his lawn. And when you give the justification for someone to say, "Yeah, I'll get off my lawn," then you're giving ear to something that is normally a non-story or a person that's not, when I say not worthy of being covered, I don't mean he's a human being as a worthy person, but
no.
It's not a headline. There's not a headline generally that's going to be happening around this person unless you stand on their lawn. And Trevor Mallard stood on his lawn. He probably put the sprinklers on as well, but he stood on his lawn. You know what I'm saying?
Playing Barry Manilow. Absolutely. I mean, I think the person who must be most grateful that Winston Peters got involved in all of this is Matt King. If Matt King had been trespassed and not Winston, this would not be a news story anymore. Because I think actually there's actually quite a good justification for trespassing someone like Matt King. Some of the things he said during those protests. I'm all for free speech, but if you're going to wield that particular stick, you maybe had an idea of doing that. But yeah, as soon as Winston gets involved, it's headline news, it's front page news, and everyone gets sucked along in the what's the word I'm looking for? The flow behind him.
Slipstream.
I mean, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. I mean, it's fascinating. If you look at those 3 sound bites that pop up, Chris Bishop is the third person in those sound bites. It's Winston Peters, it's David Seymour, it's Chris Bishop. Whereas, the only one of those who really has any potential power is Bishop, but of course they go to Winston first because he's the king of the soundbite. David Seymour's been doing a really good job of he's really managed his soundbite game over the last few years. And there's another story. I mean, I was talking about this with someone the other day. ACT have a handful of MPs. Has anyone heard anything from them? No, because Seymour has managed to make the party about him, which is a leaf straight out of the Winston Peters playbook.
They used to call New Zealand first Winston first. So
there used to be a running joke. I mean, going back to what you said about he would appear in an election. You knew an election was coming up when Winston Peters was suddenly back on the news, because then, especially when he was when he was actually in government, what you said, he would basically disappear for 3 years. And then come back up at election time. In opposition, different story. He'd be there the whole time.
Which is why I think he was such an effective opposition MP. We'll take a bit more of this feed after the Matt King. This is the same story. It went on to talk about
151 trespass notices have been issued. Of those, 144, nearly all of them, were actually arrested by.
And I think that's an important point to play. And this is what we said yesterday:
absolutely.
is that in America it's not the same, but in America you can only be trespassed from public property if you've broken the law. And I think if you're involved with the riots, if you've set fires, if you've thrown bricks, if you've actually broken laws other than congregating on public land, then absolutely you should be doing that. What are you doing, dog? Dog's breaking something. But yeah, so I'm not saying that there shouldn't have been trespass notice. I'm saying that there should be a metric, which is was there was a criminal activity.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think going back to Trevor Mallard, he's made two fundamental mistakes. The first one just being it's an overreach. I mean, it really is. There's whether there is or not, it feels like there's an element of spite involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now that whether perception is everything. I can sort of understand the logic behind it, but yeah, the perception is that this is Mallard. He's angry that people were on his lawn, to use your analogy, and he's come out swinging. The second fundamental mistake he's made is that he's got Winston Peters involved in it, and that takes it from being a slightly off decision that kind of happens and disappears out of the public eye. I think this withdrawal of the trespassers probably would have happened regardless, because I agree with you. I think there's very little legal stance for it. If anyone had taken legal action, I think they would have gotten through. But as soon as you bring Winston Peters into it, it's like flicking on a spotlight, lighting up the Sky Tower, and setting off a fireworks show all at the same time. The country is not going to ignore it. The media love this guy. He's a walking, talking headline soundbite wrapped into this enigma that is Winston Peters. So yeah, it's played out exactly the way that it was always going to, and exactly the way Trevor Mallard probably did not want it to.
And probably it's given fuel. Like, I think Winston's political career is done, right? However, if he gets fuel to rekindle that fire, if there's no embers left, if there's one ember left, then that fuel has just been poured on that ember, and he will get months of yardstick out of this by talking about the overreach of government, and they need to be held accountable. Needs to be parties in there that are going to help the tyranny of the left, these crazy lefties, and he'll milk it for all he's worth. And you say when it's an election year, because he pops up with the standard Winston lines. It'll be immigration, it'll be retirement, and it'll probably be, we will hold them accountable. They'll be the three things he'll run on for the next 18 months. I mean, I'm always interested as to why people like Winston want to get back into this. I mean, he's one of the MPs that'll be on a pretty happy and fat wicket, because he was there before the retirement scheme was taken out. And why would you ever want to go back into that thing? And it must just be a personality thing.
Yeah, look, I think there's two things. I mean, I agree with you. I think maybe his own personal political career is over, but his influence is not. And I'm going to make this comparison, and I'll give it the caveat that I am not comparing these two people as individuals at all.
That's a great setup for whatever you're going to say next.
Yeah, but Trump, you look at what's happening with Trump in America, whether he runs again or not in 2024, it's kind of beside the point. The fact is that Republicans are winning nominations in very conservative states based almost entirely, in some cases, on his endorsement. He still wields that power. Whether or not he ever has the opportunity to take that and set that power back in the White House is kind of beside the point. I mean, he is shaping Republican politics at the moment. And Peters, and like I say, I will draw the line at trying to compare Winston Peters to Donald Trump, because I don't actually believe Winston Peters is evil. But his influence remains, and yeah, maybe that is a personality thing. It must be really hard. I mean, we've seen it talking about our podcast. I always remember interviewing Don Brash, who was a guy who went from several in a row incredibly powerful positions, governor of the Reserve Bank, leader of the opposition, to kind of being irrelevant until the Orewa speech came up, and then he had his moment of relevancy again. But by the time we interviewed him, I mean, it was almost sad. The guy who had spent his life having power, being in the public eye, and he just didn't anymore. And I think Winston is not going to go gently into that sweet night at all. I think that it's what he was born to do, and he'll do it until the day he physically can't.
It's sort of a nice segue into the next thing that we're going to talk about, because the polls that were out this week, News Hub Read polls, I think is what it was. I've got another story here from News Hub to share with us. But when I saw the results earlier in the week, and National's done very well in this poll, and there's certainly a tick up for National and a tick down across all the polls. Tick up for National, tick down for Labor across all the polls. But it did make me think about the Orewa speech and Don Brash, 18 months out from an election. That was his speech. We're about 18 months out from election.
Yeah, that's
the
right.
country kind of goes, these dicks who are in power, let's have a change. It's time for a change, which you will start to hear next year. That'll be something that you start to hear, because I guess you have a 9-year cycle, but then again, COVID's probably doubled the length of this current cycle, so it probably feels like a 9-year cycle rather than a 6-year one. And then getting closer and closer and closer to the election, I think a whole bunch of people were like, hang on, if we go with this party, these are the flow-on effects from it. And I wouldn't mind delving into one of the things that came from the research, which was New Zealand wants tax cuts. Now that sounds fantastic. Everyone wants more money in their pocket. But one of the questions I'm going to have immediately is, what does that mean for New Zealand? So I know I'm a bit of a simple chap, Jeremy, but I often try and contextualize things to being quite personal. So like the budget for the country, I think about the budget for my household, and I'm like, I'd like to spend more money on stuff, but if I don't have money in the coffers and the hot water cylinder blows up, what do I do? So we've already had it. I mean, I don't think this has been mentioned overtly, but we've already just had a tax cut, taking 25 cents a litre off fuel. That's going to take a huge amount of money out of the government coffers. We all want a tax cut. I get that. We all want more money in our pocket, but I still want to go, what does that mean for the economy? And what does that mean for 2 years from now? If we get something now, like if you took a poll in my house, I think we'd all vote that I don't want to pay my mortgage, right? But probably in 6 months from now, there'd be some negative and detrimental effects from that.
Possibly,
I have more money in my pocket, but there's going to be a downstream effect which doesn't go quite so well for me having more money in my pocket. So let's just have a look at the video first of all with this silver fox of a man. And the good thing about this little video is it covers off, there's 3 things. 1 is the polls for the actual parties. 2 is we want a tax cut. 3 is we want GST off food. It's all covered in this one clip, and then we can have a chat about it.
It's great.
The happiest chap in the Nats.
Well, what a difference from the hammering we've had over the last couple of years.
Bless him.
40% mark in last night's News Hub Read Research poll.
We're feeling good and confident at the moment.
Did you see the poll last night?
Over in the red camp, they don't want to talk about their 6-point tumble.
I haven't looked at it. I'm not really concerned about the poll.
Well, perhaps they should take a moment to reflect. The country's fed up with them over the cost of living crisis, and voters are looking for something special from the government's budget in 2 weeks.
I think everybody wants a tax cut. I think the cost of living is just getting out of control.
Yeah, I think a tax cut would always be good.
Would be nice.
Bad news, the finance minister appears allergic to the idea, but perhaps this will make him reconsider. We asked in our latest poll, do you think the government should give New Zealanders a tax cut in the upcoming May budget? A clear majority, 68.7% said yes, hand back over the cash, while only 23.7% said no. Even a majority of Labor voters, 54.2% want a tax cut, with 35.7% saying, nah, you keep it. But so
I'm going to pause it there for a second because I've just thought of something, right? I remember in my previous life doing work in radio that I did quite a bit of research around what a tax cut would be. And I remember then, on average, a $10 a week tax cut would be $1 billion out of public coffers. And when I've just heard this is the first time I've thought about this, what I've interrupted myself. We call this doing the Sam Cedar, Jeremy, when we go, pause there, and we talk about it. I think it's a terrible question. Do you want a tax cut? I think the question should be, do you want a meaningful tax cut?
Yeah.
Because I think most people would go $10 a week. What would $10 a week do for me versus collectively, what would that do for the country? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but look, I completely agree. I think tax cut, it is a terrible question. Would you like a tax cut? I mean, it's kind of like, when did you stop beating your wife? There is no correct answer to that question. Of course, people want a tax cut, but I mean, my position is slightly different because the vast majority, 98, 99% of my work is taxed at withholding tax rates. So, a change in the income tax rate makes virtually no difference to me. It makes a slight difference in my end of year tax return. but it doesn't make a lot of difference to me on a week-to-week basis. So yeah, a meaningful tax cut is a different thing, and yeah, I agree with you with the. I mean, not only the fact that we've just taken the fuel levy down, but I mean, we've just spent 3 years fighting a pandemic and spent a lot of money on bailing out people like myself, self-employed people, the government support, the wage subsidy scheme, all of which I am incredibly grateful for. But also, I'm happy to pay my taxes to help repay that. I'm digressing slightly. I want to make three really quick points. Firstly, going back to your idea about it's time for a change. Yeah, I think that's inevitable. We've had very few 3-term governments in this country historically ever. And it's a global thing that after a major event, I mean, I always go back to the fact that Winston Churchill got voted out immediately after World War II. Hero of the nation, got voted out in a landslide in 1946, 45, 46. And I think that it's inevitable that there's going to be a swing. We've seen our Prime Minister on our TVs every day for 3 years, until recently. We've seen Grant Robertson. We've seen so much of this government that it's absolutely natural for your uninvested voter, to sound slightly patronizing, to just go, oh, I just want something different.
Yeah.
Even if that something different doesn't necessarily have a mass. I mean, Christopher Luxon, just I don't really see what the appeal is, but he doesn't need it at the moment. It's his election to lose.
Yeah.
I thought that 3 years ago. I thought it was National's election to lose, and boy, did they. So I think it's hilarious seeing those National MPs being interviewed on the steps of Parliament. I mean, bless them for not hiding it, man. I mean, take the win, go for it. You can't begrudge that. Secondly, the tax cut thing, I agree. Yeah, saying would you like a tax cut is like saying, hey, I've got $5, you want it?
Yeah. Here's some chocolate. Would you like a piece?
Yeah.
Yes.
And and people don't do that maths like you just said. They go, oh, $10 in my own pocket, that's great. But when it equates to a 9 or 10 figure sum out of the national budget, that's just not that's why I'm not the Minister of Finance, because that's not a math I can do in my head.
Yeah.
I think we're going to move on to this, so maybe I'll wait. But the GST thing, I think, is a slightly different. I think there's a much more solid argument. So let's go with that.
Let's keep going with the clip, because I want to come back to as well about the well, maybe I won't come back to it. Maybe I'll just mention now the meaningful tax cut. I did some math last week on the show. I like numbers, and I did a piece on the cost of housing, or house prices are coming down by 10%. But I did the numbers based on buying that $770,000 house today, dropping 10%. So it's now worth 700. If you had bought it 12 months ago, it would have been 770. Buying it 12 months ago with the interest rates was exponentially cheaper at a higher price than what it is today at 10% reduced price. And I worked out that a $770,000 house, 12 months ago.
You're obviously talking Dunedin prices, by the way. Can I just say?
I know,
770 would be a 1-bedroom apartment up here. But anyway, carry on.
But I use the national average, Jeremy.
No. I'm being facetious. Yeah.
But the other thing is, because I was talking about first-home buyers. So a $770,000 house 12 months ago would have to be about $550,000 for it to be more affordable today. And no house prices are dropping that much. So when I talk about a meaningful tax cut, if your mortgage has just gone up by several hundred, if not $1,000 a month, I'm not saying we don't want a $10 bill, but the benefit you get of $10 a week, $45 a month, versus $1,000 new in your mortgage, versus what that $10 could do in the whole. They're just the numbers that I want people to be aware of. Anyway,
the other thing. Sorry, you just reminded me of the other point I wanted to make is, of course, it's natural to blame whoever is in power for the rise in the cost of living, but just open a newspaper. There is a perfect economic storm happening out there in the world. I had a meeting with my financial advisor recently, and who was explaining why my very small portfolio has taken a dive recently. And I don't understand the stock market, but you don't have to. We're at the tail end of a global pandemic. International transport is still up in the air. Shanghai's port is still essentially closed. There's a war happening in Europe. The cost of living, inflation, is not something that has been caused by this or any other New Zealand government. We're a small player in a global scheme. But of course, like the swing, like wanting a change, it's perfectly natural to blame whoever's in power. It's natural, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Anyway.
And Labor is going to suffer from the
Of
concept
course
of
we are.
gish galloping for next election, because for those who don't know, a gish gallop is when one side or one person can say a headline and it takes the other side 10 minutes to explain why it's wrong.
Yeah.
So National will be going, rents have gone up by $50 a week, or food's gone up by 23%. These guys are in charge. If they're in charge, they're responsible.
Exactly.
Right? That's it. They've done their job. Labor will then need to spend 20 minutes explaining why actually the Reserve Bank. I played a piece from an economist the other day who said that, for example, inflation is really at the hands of the Reserve Bank. Government's got very little to do with inflation.
Oh, yeah.
And he literally said the Reserve Bank got it wrong. They thought the economy would be doing worse. Because the economy is doing better than it is, they projected wrong. It takes 9 to 12 months for their projections to hit the economy. What they were doing 9 to 12 months ago was projecting a 5 or 6% unemployment. We have a better economy. So because we have a better economy, the Reserve Bank got it wrong. And that's one of the main drivers of the inflation we're in at the moment.
There's also the fact that, the Federal Reserve in the US got it wrong as well. They tried to raise interest rates about a year ago. They wanted to put their interest rates up in quite a big chunk. And they did the first chunk of that and then realized that politically it was disastrous. The swing against it in the US. So they've been trickling their interest rates up slowly over the last 12 months. Which trickles down to us, which means ours, regardless of the Reserve Bank, our inflation rates would be going up anyway. So you add those two things together, and like I say, it's kind of a perfect storm for an inflation rise. And it's kind of not certainly not in our control, you and me, and it's not really in the guy who's on screen. It's not really in Grant Robertson's control either.
This economist talked about, I think, 5 markers that contribute to inflation, and being at the hands primarily of the Reserve Bank, and 3 of them were international things.
Yeah, of course.
I think one of them was secondhand car prices, and coming from Asia, parts of Asia primarily. But as I've just said, and I've just taken as long to explain it again, a gish gallop is where one side has to go. But this is why that statement is wrong, whereas people have just heard the statement and they've flicked on to the next channel, or they've read the headline, or they've whatever, and it's going to be hard for Labor to get the message across that maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. Speaking of, let's have a look.
Sorry.
We do not agree that tax cuts that favour...
Oh, that's right.
Pressure is piling on from National.
Kiwis are doing it incredibly tough. What we want to do is be able to give more of their money back to them to spend and save it as they wish.
From ACT.
Of course we should give people some more of their money back.
Even from Te Pāti Māori, though they want a different type of tax cut, the removal of GST from food. And Kiwis want that too. 76.6% said they support the policy, while just 18.5% said no.
It's a fair removal of tax for everybody, so it's not doesn't discriminate against rich or poor.
The political pressure getting to Grant Robertson, he unleashed on Christopher Luxon for saying that National's Tauranga candidate brings diversity to their team because he's educated.
Finally, we know what's been missing all along. According to Mr. Luxon, it's just they're all a bit thick. That's all it is.
That's not very nice, Mr. Robertson.
No doubt.
So there's pretty much the that's a nice live screen all of a sudden. I should screen grab that one. I could use it. So that's pretty much the arguments there, all of them in one kind of fell swoop. My question I'd like to ask an economist, and we did reach out to a couple of things, didn't get through to them, is, what would happen to the economy in 2 years from now should these things be enacted? Should we give tax cuts? Should we take GST off? Well, they just said food, but I think Australia does like healthy food. So it's like fruit and veggies that's taken off there. What does that mean for us? If I don't know, I just think sometimes we have to tighten our own personal belts for the betterment of our long-term future, whether it's a mortgage or rent or family or paying your school fees or whatever. What should we be doing? Would tax cuts back to people, and I don't know the answer to this, tax cuts back to people like drive back into the economy and actually help it a bit, or would it hurt infrastructure and government controlled issues in 2 years from now?
Now, here's my thought on the GST thing, because that argument that it's a universal tax, it doesn't discriminate, all holds water. It all makes a lot of sense. Then you come to this argument, like you just brought up. Do you only take the GST off quote unquote healthy food? Which opens a whole raft of arguments about, nanny state. Is this a treat tax? Is this a tax on, on lower economic situations where maybe you can't afford, even without the GST, to buy healthier necessarily? You just have to buy food basics. So here's my thought: is why don't we take the GST only off locally produced food?
Right.
Regardless of what it is, whether it's healthy or not, why don't we make something produced in the Waikato, whether it be an apple or a chocolate bar, cheaper than one that's imported from Australia or California? In some ways, that encourages buying local. It encourages local producers to produce more. It encourages local retailers, wholesalers, to look at the local market first. You could argue that if they'd done that 5 years ago, Cadbury wouldn't have felt they had to move from Dunedin to Australia.
No.
And maybe it's just maybe it's easier to police than as soon as you start doing things like healthy food versus unhealthy food. I mean, you look at the US in particular. It's amazing what you can get qualified as a food over there, because it avoids. Well, it really does. I mean, there are pharmaceutical drugs that are qualified. It is called the Food and Drug Administration.
Yeah.
Because there are loopholes of getting something qualified as food, which means you don't have the same oversight as you do if it's a drug. You don't have the same taxation. You don't have, the approval strategies. But yeah, I mean, that would just be my idea. Would let's take GST off locally produced food, cut down on carbon miles. Make it more obvious in a supermarket about what you're buying. I mean, if you've got two oranges side by side and one of them's 15% cheaper than the other, I mean, that's a heads up you're buying local. Just a thought.
Yeah. And actually, it wouldn't be that difficult to do, because.
No, you wouldn't think so.
I mean, there would be some, you always find those items, it's not food, but like, is it a New Zealand made item or is it a New Zealand assembled item?
Yeah. And ingredients. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess you just say, well, it has to be made in NZ. It has to have the made in NZ tick on it or whatever on it. And that means straight away the arguments that we've all heard before about how 2 litres of Fonterra milk is cheaper in Perth than it is in Hamilton possibly would go away.
Yeah, exactly. And I go back to an interview you did the last time I was on the show with the guy making the vegan burger place down the road from you, where he was explaining that one of the reasons they have price issues is that we don't produce any soy in this country, which I must admit I did not know. So yeah, you are going to have some issues with that. Is it might be a locally made plant-based burger, but you've got to import some of the ingredients. But I mean, you would think there's a way around that. Like you say, there was a way around getting the made in New Zealand tech.
It's a pretty privileged world we live in, though, where we're worrying about where our soy is coming from. I mean,
exactly.
If it had been, and I know there probably weren't vegans 200 years ago, but 200 years ago, 100 years ago, we weren't that worried about how much our Californian oranges were, because we didn't have fucking Californian oranges.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So surely there's ways around that by going, okay, so if we want to make our burger truly local, then what's the product rather than imported soy that we're going to use? There's got to be something.
Yeah. I mean, the mandarins are the benchmark for me. The fact that you can get them every day of the year. In a supermarket at the moment, you can get them any time of year. When I was growing up in the UK, we would get a mandarin in our Christmas stocking. I'm not saying it's not like a block of coal, but it was a treat, because they were available at that time of year.
Yeah.
Whereas we have gotten used to the fact that certain things are available year round, not paying attention to the fact that sometimes of the year. I mean, you hear this all the time. Why are strawberries so cheap at the moment? Well, because they're coming from Northland. They're not coming from South America. They're not coming from Queensland. And, maybe removing the GST on locally product will make that a little more obvious, gives people an option. And because I do completely agree, it is one of the taxes you can bring in that does not favour a certain tax bracket. It does level the playing. It is a level playing field when you're buying food. You know, everyone buys food. If you make certain foods 15% cheaper, that affects everybody.
But it does affect everybody, but it probably advantages those
That's
with
what
less
I mean.
money more. Yeah.
When I say affect, it affects positively across the board. But
Because
yeah,
if you've got $1 million paying $3.99 for your feijoas, it's very strange in this. You know this because you've been down. You're well associated with Dunedin. Being in Auckland, and every second fucking household has got feijoas falling off trees in the front yard,
exactly.
having to pay for them in Dunedin. But anyway, the $3.99 for feijoas would be. I forgot what I was going to say, but if they were locally produced, manufactured, and therefore were that much cheaper, you'd much more gravitate towards them rather than the ones bought in from Sydney or whatever like that.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Hey, that's it's interesting actually. I like your idea. I really like that idea. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's been brought up before. I haven't heard it. Because it does always come back to this argument about taxing, you know, whether we take GST off healthy food. And whilst I completely agree with that in principle, it is also problematic. You know, it's you do get open to these accusations of it's nannies. It's like a sugar tax. You know, you look at the Cook Islands, which does have a really high sugar tax, and it works over there because as a society they've just accepted it. But tourists hate it. You know, they can't understand why they're paying $8 for a small bottle of Coke.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, it's not about you. It's about the health of of the people who live there and have to pay that every time. But I think, I just think if you make it universal, local or non-local, it could apply to R&J's licorice just as much as it applies to, you know, Farmer Joe's eggs. You know, you can go. You sort of avoid that connotation and go with the, hey, we're just trying to promote local businesses.
Yeah,
and they could use it at the moment. I
remember what I was going to say. I was going to say you're buying your feijoas. Obviously, if you've got an income of $20,000 and you're saving 40 cents per kilo, it's going to be a lot more valuable to you than if you got $1 million because you can afford
100%. Yeah, I'm in a position where if I'm buying between two brands at the supermarket, the price difference of $1 doesn't make a big difference to me. But I'm fully aware that for an awful lot of people it does.
Yep. All right, Nadia Lim. We have some news around Nadia Lim in the last 24 hours. Again, it's one of these things where, and I'm not saying Nadia Lim's done anything to do this, but when people get headlines for things other people have done, like Winston has got headlines for stuff that that Trevor Mallard has done. Nadia Lim has been brought into the spotlight this morning because there was a rich lister. His name is
Simon Henry.
Simon Henry, there he is. Yep. Who is the founder and CEO of a specialty chemicals company, DGL. By calculating his net worth, $700 million. He was doing an article with Hamish McNichol from the National Business Review, I believe. And he was told, Hamish, in this conversation, we'll talk about the interesting stuff after we've talked about all the important business stuff. What was the interesting stuff? Well, the interesting stuff was him slamming My Food Bag and being particularly offensive towards Nadia Lim. Let me read out what he actually said in this interview. The thing that is fascinating about this interview is he starts by saying, to make this point, I can tell you, and you can quote me.
Oh, yeah.
So he's making it very clear, I've got something to say, and you should definitely reprint this.
Yeah. It's like the universal signal that someone's about to mansplain something to you.
Yeah. This is talking of Nadia Lim and talking of My Food Bag. When you've got Nadia Lim, when you've got a little bit of Eurasian fluff in the middle of your prospectus with the blouse unbuttoned showing some cleavage, and that's what it takes you to sell your scrip, then you know you're in trouble. Now, scrip is to do with when you're floating a company on the stock market and the shares or whatever it is, your wares. Yeah. So think about selling your product, then you know you're in trouble. He went on to say, go back to that prospectus and find that photo. You know you're in trouble. I mean, you know when you've got a TV celebrity showing off her sensuality to hawk content, script again, then you know you're in trouble. So firstly, it's very important for us to have a look at the offending photo in question. Do I need to put a rating on when this goes up onto YouTube properly? Do I need to put an adults only rating?
Yeah, that's, big black bar across the screen. Yeah.
Yeah. But We actually have some commentary from Nadia Lim, who was on the AM show this morning. But Jeremy, first of all, feel free.
Well, can I just say, I mean, culturally, I think the only thing offensive about that photo is possibly the hat sitting on the table. It's a bit of a no-no. Yeah, I mean, where do you start with this? I mean, you can pull 5 words out of that which are going to fire off explode Twitter immediately. Eurasian, fluff, sensuality. I mean, even TV celebrity. Come on. I mean, I don't know. Maybe, if someone had found out how to sexualize selling a specialty chemicals company, they would have done it by now. The only specialty chemicals that you can get away with selling sexually are Viagra. Yeah. You gotta wonder sometimes, like, how do you? This guy knew that what he was about to say was going to be offensive. That opening line, you can
think
quote
so,
me
though?
on this.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, I guess so, yeah.
How do you not? I mean, how do you not? Unless it's just a massive sense of entitlement, which this guy seems to have. I know everything about the business I'm with. Yeah, let's be honest. When you're opening any interview by telling someone you're worth $700 million, it's only going to go one way from that point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it just, I mean, in this case, I'm happy Nadia's got some publicity out of this. If it pushes her share price up, if it pushes half a dozen more people to try my food bag, if there's some bloke sitting at home in some small town who doesn't know how to cook and sees that photo and goes, oh yeah, I'll get a healthy meal delivered to my door, I'm okay with that.
Sure, okay.
I don't think that's how it's going to go. But yeah, I mean, this guy, come on. Nadia's lovely. I've met her. She's a very astute businesswoman. She's highly respected. Sure, their share launch wasn't the massive success that some people expected it to be. But 99% of share launches aren't. It's got nothing to do with having a picture of her or anybody else on the prospectus.
Let's have a listen to what Nadia said this morning, how she responded to it.
Do that.
Have you ever met Simon Henry?
No, never. Never ever.
Right. Okay. So that is quite interesting. Now, let me bring up the quote then, because he has lots to say about you. He says, when you've got Nadia Lim, when you've got a little bit of Eurasian fluff in the middle of your prospectus with a blouse unbuttoned showing some cleavage, and that's what it takes to sell your script, then you know you're in trouble. There's a lot to unpack there. So
there was more. There was quite a lot
there
more.
Was more. But let's break it down and look at the term he uses, Eurasian fluff. How do you feel about being described like that?
Well, to be honest, I'm a tough cookie. Like, I've had enough years and support and opportunities to build up a tough skin and become resilient and confident. But my big issue with it is how it saddens me how other people, women and women of color and other ethnic backgrounds who might see themselves in those comments, how they would feel and how they would feel hurt. And I had the chance to reflect on these comments when I caught my flight from Christchurch back down home to Queenstown yesterday. And my air host was this lovely, also Eurasian girl who, she was quite a bit younger than me, and she was clearly of Asian descent. And we were sitting opposite each other, and I smiled at her and she smiled back at me. And then it hit me. I was like, I wonder what she thinks when she reads comments like this or hears things like that. Like, that's what's so damaging. Young people who hear these things over and over again, who then over time somehow start to believe that maybe they're less capable, have less to give and contribute than their peers. And that's why comments like this are so damaging. It's water for ducks back to me, but it's for other people that I feel really, really sad and disappointed for. I mean, he's in a great position of power and influence, and he could use that to celebrate diversity and inclusion and be a great example and leader. But
there you go. So there's pretty much the gist, and then the conversation goes on to some more details. But you can't really rebut it any better than that, can you?
No, not at all. It's a fantastic point. It's interesting actually. There's been part of me actually has been working out what it is what it was about what he said that really jumped out at me, and I haven't quite been able to put my finger on it, but she just has. It's the fact that fluff is bad enough, but when you put an ethnic, not even slur necessarily, but when you feel you have to put the descriptor on there, would he have would he have said Caucasian fluff? Would he have said Pākehā fluff? It's the fact that you put that difference maker in there. It's fluff is bad enough, but when you've got the double whammy of sexism and racism together, it just really hits home. And as Nadia has just pointed out there, it took me a minute to work that out because it doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, of course.
Certainly no one's ever going to describe me as Eurasian. They're certainly not going to describe me as fluff, let's be fair. But it doesn't hit home for me. But she's absolutely right that that flight attendant that she was sitting opposite, if I go out today, I'm going to see young Eurasian. I'm not even sure if that's an acceptable term. I don't know because it doesn't apply to me. And it's those people. It's those people that get hurt. And good on her for pointing that out.
I think I'm just looking up the word Eurasian as we're talking about it. I think that Nadia herself used it in a way. I'm assuming it means someone of European and ancestry and Asian ancestry. So someone who might have a European mum or dad and an Asian, whatever the other side is, dad or mum. So it doesn't seem to be a derogatory term.
No, okay, yeah. Well, like I say, it's again something that I wouldn't necessarily think of because I'm not going to take personal offense at either of those two terms because they're not things that I think anyone's going to be thinking of me when they look at me. And I think that's what it comes down to is, I'm privileged in the fact that when people look at me, I don't immediately think, oh, they're making a judgment call based on how I look.
Yeah.
Some people, I'm sure some people are, but it's not something I have to deal with in my day-to-day life because I'm a white middle-class dude.
I just had that thought in the back of my head. You know how the African-American community use the N-word. Nadia has just used the term Eurasian, and I just thought, imagine if in a few years from now it's deemed a very derogatory term, and people come back and find this clip and they're like, "These guys said this word." I don't think that's the case, but it's just people within the group can use the word, and no one else is allowed to. But
this guy obviously is not. What we are discussing right now is a thought process that Simon, whatever his name is, has not had.
No, and just for clarity, it's a Eurasian as a person of mixed Asian and European ancestry.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd ever heard that term necessarily before this conversation today, but after hearing them say it, I'm like, oh, you're European Asian, got it, got it with it. Now what are we at? We're at midday. There's a couple of other things we were going to talk about. I think there's one thing we do definitely need to talk about with you, because the last time you were with us. We talked. I was just after the Will Smith incident, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
From memory.
Well, it was a little bit after. Yeah, but yes. Yeah, you wanted to talk to a comedian about it. Fair enough.
Yes. So, as for someone who's been on stage, you were a good person to talk to about experiences on stage. And late last night, I noticed actually before I went to bed. So it was late last night. We got news that Dave Pell had been quote unquote attacked, and I'm putting parentheses around that because. You flick someone across the ear, it's an attack. You stick a knife in someone, it's an attack. So it's, it's on the more minor end of. Although I heard something today that the guy had a fake gun.
Yeah, with a blade attached to it. He has actually been charged with assault with a deadly weapon.
Okay, I withdraw my. I was starting to go down a commentary of little less serious, but no, I withdraw all of that. I wasn't completely clear on that. Yeah. So. Withdraw all of that. So so this is some video that came out. Everyone would have probably seen this by now, but if you haven't, here is Dave Chappelle. It looks like Dave Chappelle's playing second five, and the opposition team's coming up to try and hit him around the waist with a pretty good tackle. That's what it looks like. It's not a very good angle. I think there's a closer one. I'm pretty sure.
There is, yeah.
So this is the hubbub going on around stage. Dave's on the ground there. Come on, let's get a better. Come on, where's the better angle?
That that Will Smith?
Oh, that was Chris Rock came out.
Was that Will Smith?
That wasn't a very good angle. I'll find a better one while we're talking about it. But this has obviously started a whole conversation around, safety on stage, comedians, and we'll just say performers because wouldn't have to be a comedian. Dave Chappelle made a joke about it being a trans man. I don't know if that's true or not. It might have just been a throwaway joke. But now the conversation is going on. Is it a trans activist attacking him for his last special? Is it because they've seen it modeled by Will Smith on stage? Or is this just a lunatic with mental health issues? But while I look for the clip, Jeremy, go for it.
Well, yeah. I mean, going off the scattered headlines that I've been reading today, my first impression is that this is a person with no fixed abode is the term they've used,
Right.
or not having an address, I think is the term. It's a homeless guy with, apparently, it seems to be with mental health issues. So, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's not, we talked about this before we came on air. It's not necessarily, that's not a sexy headline. Dave Chappelle is obviously has had his controversies over recent years with his specials, with his particularly with his comments on the trans community. The fact that Chris Rock was able to come out and refer to the Will Smith immediately links the two things in a funny way. It's great. The big question here, obviously, I mean, the Hollywood Bowl is not, we're not talking about an open mic gig in some strip mall in small town America. I mean, this is a major venue. And you've got to ask, where the hell was the security? If it can happen on stage at the Hollywood Bowl, what's going to stop it happening on stage at Spark Arena or something? I mean, I don't know. I think it's far too early to say. My immediate instinct is that this is not what we were talking about the last time we were on. This is not that the Will Smith thing at the Oscars has opened the floodgates of people thinking it's okay to attack comedians. This appears to be some guy with his own issues decided to take it out on a big stage. But I mean, it's a pretty serious attack if you look at it.
Yeah. I was going to withdraw my tackle. It wasn't a particularly good tackle. He didn't have his body in good position there. Yeah. George, just play it. George, this is George sharing his screen. George, just take it back. I'm going to put your sound back on, George. I want to see what he says beforehand in the build up to it.
Behind me on the DJ table is one of the most prolific producers that hip hop has ever presented, the mighty Nadia Lim. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise for hip hop history.
And the crew comes out. Just keep rolling it there. The crew comes out there. I saw a headline about Jamie Foxx coming out on stage, and the dude was put into an ambulance when he was taken away. So he was obviously dealt with fairly harshly by not just security, the non-existent security, but also there were some performers and stuff that got into Cliffy and Dave as well. Cliffy, look after.
I'm going to kill them.
So I guess I got to say, there we go. So this is after the event. I haven't seen any of this yet. Dave popping off stage. All right, I'm going to mute that. So I guess it's just a headline. It's a tabloidy headline, and I wanted to have a look at it and see what your perspective was. I mean, have you? I might have answered this last time. Have you ever felt like not very secure at a gig or anything, or is it just a completely different culture in New Zealand?
I've had aggression at gigs. I did have one situation in Wellington once where a guy was getting very aggressive towards me on stage. Thankfully, that was in an incredibly well-run venue, and he was dealt with very quickly by security. He did go out and attacked somebody on the street after the gig. He took it out on a random stranger, and so by the time I left the gig, there were 4 police cars, and he was being dragged away in handcuffs. But again, I mean, it was a situation that potentially could have gone wrong. It's about the only one I can think of. I know comedians overseas who have been attacked on stage. I know someone who's had a gun pulled on them while they've been on stage in the US. So this is not a new thing. like we talked about with the Chris Rock thing, it's not something that I worry about for myself. It's something that I kind of worry about for first timers, or people doing their first, second, third gig in some small pub that does not have bouncers, which is where everybody starts. You're in a back room of some pub, or on stage in the corner while they turn the rugby league off just before you start, which is literally how my career started. That's what concerns me, because a lot of young comics make the mistake of understandable mistake of thinking that one way to cut through and get noticed is by being deliberately offensive. So it worries me that it can happen there. There's a whole other concern, which obviously does not apply to me, was how this happened at a major venue, this was the Netflix is a joke comedy festival.
It's pretty
big event. You look at the lineup and the fact that you've got Jamie Foxx, Dave Chappelle, and Chris Rock on the same bill. It's kind of and if this guy really did have a replica weapon with a blade attached to it, how the hell he got that into the venue in downtown LA is
how he got it into the venue, how he got on stage. And actually, when you have a look, I've got a freeze frame on my screen. I'll bring my screen back up. When you have a look at that impact there, how that if there was a blade on the end of that, how that blade didn't end up piercing Dave Chappelle.
One of the headlines I've heard is that he had the weapon with him, but they aren't sure if he intended to use it. So I'm not sure if he was actually physically holding it, or if you can sort of see he's got a backpack on, whether it was in that. But regardless, I've been to sporting events in the US, and there are metal detectors on every gate. You can't take a bag into a stadium in the US unless it's transparent. You can only take a clear plastic bag so that they can see it as you walk in. So obviously they don't have that security, or who knows? I'm speculating here. Maybe he is a homeless guy who was sleeping under the stage. That happens. Who knows? But at the moment, it's a headline. It's a juicy headline. I'm not sure if it's. I don't know if it's a harbinger of things to come, or. And I also, there's no evidence to me that this was specifically about anything Dave Chappelle said on that night or has said previously. The impression I get is this guy that was just his moment. Could have been anyone on stage when he did it.
All right, listen, we were going to talk about gender pay gap as well today. In fact, one of the main things we're going to talk about, but we've kind of come to the end, and I'm going to push it off till tomorrow's show. George, you want to come back in to wrap up? What do you want to do? You're welcome to come back if you want, George. You're always welcome to come back. We know that. Is there anything you want to add in, George? Seeing we've just kind of wrapped up all those conversations, we will do gender pay gap tomorrow for people who want to join in. And just while we're watching, for people to remember, next week we're going to be starting at midday and going till 1, which is going to change up the times a little bit. And the week after that, we're going to be starting at 10 p.m. and just trying it in the evening and see what people like and how they respond to it. So just as a reminder, George, you want to throw anything in while you're here?
I want to ask Jeremy what time he goes to bed.
I'll be available at 10 o'clock. Don't worry about that. At the moment, my sleep patterns are. I am a night owl, despite the fact that I am not doing a lot of work at night. I'm a borderline insomniac as it is. So if you need me at 10 o'clock, I'm available.
Well, cool. That's where. Not to talk about like inside stuff. Anyway, whatever. Talk about whatever it is behind the whatever it is, but we're talking about how people would most like to enjoy this. And I was wondering if an evening thing might be better. People are wound down at the end of the day, keep them some company and talk some shit. And I guess one of the things is I can't imagine getting Robert Patman at 10:45 at night is going to be quite as easy, but perhaps getting Jeremy Elwood will be easier. I don't know.
Well, maybe figure that out. It's the joy of being able to do a pre-record, right?
Yeah, very good. All right, guys. Thanks, George. Thanks for that background work you put in there, and thanks for that clip. I want a version of that clip. I want you to send me the link because I want to watch that thing in its entirety with Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, he does say, "Oh, there was a trans man at the end." By the way,
yeah, I'd heard that. Yeah.
I wonder. He was obviously joking as well. I think it'll come out to being like Jeremy said. It'll end up being so. We're in an interesting age in our life when I'm worried about offending the man that just attacked Dave Chappelle by calling him a lunatic.
Yeah,
it's an interesting phase we live in. I was thinking, he's just some lunatic. I thought, should I call him a lunatic? Should I not? It's like some fucking moronic lunatic with massive mental health issues as well.
But the important question, Pat, was he Eurasian?
And was he fluffy?
Yeah,
I'm fluffy. Could I be considered a piece of fluff?
Oh, absolutely, mate. Yeah, I'd buy you.
Actually, Georgia, you're a bit more fluffy. You're that kind of a few years younger.
Yeah. The
fluffier.
wind's going to blow it off. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Really love chatting with you. Appreciate you jumping in again, and we'll talk to you again some stage in the future.
Great.
George, thanks for your time today. You are, as always, the brains and the looks behind this operation. And we will be back again tomorrow morning from 11. But remember, put it into your diaries. Next week, we're going to have a week run doing it at midday, just to see what it's like having it at midday, which means we're going to have to remake that trailer that says every day at 11, because it's not going to be every day at 11. All right, team, all the best. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, George. Thank you. And we'll see you tomorrow from 11.